The closet smelled of industrial lemon and stale dust, a sharp chemical tang that burned the back of my throat. I pressed my spine against the metal shelving, the cold steel biting through the thin silk of my dress, grounding me in the dark. Outside, beyond the heavy oak door, the gala was a muffled oceanic roar. Clinking champagne flutes, the murmur of polite judgment, the suffocating weight of my own name being spoken with pity. My chest felt too tight, a physical band of iron constricting my lungs. I had run. I had actually run from my own debut. The humiliation was a living thing, clawing at my throat. Then, the silence of my hiding place shattered. The doorknob turned with a slow, deliberate click, and a beam of white light sliced through the darkness, blinding me. The light pinned me against the shelves like a specimen on a slide. I threw a hand up to shield my eyes, my heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. In the harsh glare, dust motes danced like suspended glitter, marking the only movement in the sudden, suffocating stillness. I expected a shout. I expected the museum director, or worse, a critic with a notepad ready to document the artist's breakdown in real time. But the voice that broke the silence wasn't shrill or mocking. It was low, resonant, and terrifyingly calm. "This isn't the coat check," the voice said. I blinked, my eyes watering as the beam lowered, shifting from my face to the floor. The afterimage of the light burned in my vision, a purple blotch that slowly faded to reveal the figure standing in the doorway. She was tall, filling the frame of the door with an imposing, solid grace. The silhouette was cut sharp by the uniform, the dark, pressed lines of the trousers, the heavy utility belt resting on hips that didn't shift with uncertainty. She wasn't startled. She was the one holding the flashlight. She was the one who belonged here. I was just looking for... I stammered, the lie dying in my throat before it could even take shape. There was no point. I was a woman in a backless evening gown, cowering between a mop bucket and a stack of paper towels. Dignity had left the building hours ago. I wasn't going to retrieve it now. The woman stepped inside. She didn't ask me to leave. She didn't hold the door open and gesture for me to return to the sharks in the gallery. She simply stepped into the cramped space and let the door click shut behind her. The darkness returned, but it was different now. It wasn't empty. It was occupied. The only illumination came from the flashlight she kept pointed at the floor, casting long, strange shadows up her body, highlighting the sharp line of a jaw, the curve of a neck, the glint of a badge. "You're Olivia," she stated. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, delivered with the same neutral precision one might use to identify a security breach. "I am," I whispered, feeling smaller than I ever had under the gallery lights. "Are you going to throw me out?" "That depends," she said, finally lifting her gaze to meet mine. Even in the dim, scattered light, her eyes were striking, dark, intelligent, and completely unflinching. She looked at me not as the star of the evening or the tragic failure the critics were currently dissecting, but as a physical fact in her space. "Are you planning to steal the cleaning supplies?" A startled laugh escaped me, sounding jagged and breathless in the small room. "No." "Then you're just trespassing." She took a step closer, and the air in the closet seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden, undeniable electricity. The space was too small for two people, especially two strangers. I could smell her now, not the expensive, cloying perfumes of the gala guests, but something clean and sharp. Rainwater, starch, and the faint, metallic scent of the night air. She was close enough that I could see the rise and fall of her chest, the steady, rhythmic breathing that contrasted so sharply with my own shallow gasps. The power dynamic was absolute. I was the intruder, the chaotic element hiding in the dark. She was the enforcer, the order, the one with the keys and the light. And yet, she wasn't moving to escort me out. She was just watching me, her gaze traveling over my face with a slow, deliberate weight that felt more intimate than any touch. "I can't go back out there," I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could check it. "Please, just give me a minute." She didn't blink. She didn't offer false comfort or platitudes about how it can't be that bad. She just studied me, her presence a solid wall against the panic trying to consume me. Then, with a movement so subtle I almost missed it, her thumb slid over the switch of the flashlight. The beam died. We were plunged back into absolute darkness. But the silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was heavy, warm, and vibrating with the proximity of a woman who had decided, for reasons I couldn't yet fathom, to stay in the dark with me. "Take your minute," she said, her voice a velvet shadow in the black. "I'm not going anywhere." The darkness didn't hide me anymore. It only amplified the sensation of being near her. Without the visual distraction of the mops and the shelving, my world narrowed down to the sound of her breathing and the scent of her, rainwater and crisp uniform starch cutting through the chemical tang of the closet. It was disorienting. A minute ago, I had been alone in a vacuum of panic. Now, I was standing in a pitch-black box with a woman whose name I didn't know, but whose presence felt heavier and more real than the entire crowd I had just fled. "You're the name on the banner out front," she said. Her voice came from the dark, low and resonant, vibrating in the small space. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact, delivered with that same unnerving calm. "The woman in the red dress on the program, Olivia Vance." I flinched at the sound of my own name. Out there, spoken by the critics, it felt like an indictment. In here, spoken by her, it sounded different, grounded. "I am," I whispered, pressing my back harder against the metal shelf, the cold steel grounding me. Though currently, I'm considering a name change, maybe something anonymous. Jane Doe sounds nice. "Jane Doe is usually reserved for bodies in the morgue," she replied dryly. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric as she shifted her weight, the creak of leather from her utility belt. She was close. Too close. "Why is the guest of honor standing in the dark with a bucket?" "I prefer the company of cleaning supplies," I deflected, trying to summon the sharp, witty persona I wore for interviews, the armor that was supposed to protect me. "They're less judgmental than the board of directors, and they don't drink all the champagne." She didn't laugh. She didn't even huff in amusement. The silence that followed my deflection was thick, heavy with a patience that felt like a physical weight. She was waiting. She saw right through the performance, through the deflection, through the silk dress and the carefully pinned hair. She saw the trembling hands I was trying to hide in the folds of my skirt. "You're shaking," she said softly. It wasn't pity. It was precision, an observation of a physical state. The fight went out of me all at once. My shoulders slumped, the adrenaline crash leaving me hollowed out. "I'm hiding," I admitted, the truth scraping my throat. "I'm hiding because if I have to hear one more person tell me my work is promising but ultimately vacant, I'm going to scream, and that doesn't look good on a press release." "Vacant." She repeated the word, testing its weight. "That was the headline," I said, the shame burning hot behind my eyes. "The critic from the Times. He said the technique was flawless, but the soul was missing. He called it a beautiful empty shell. And the worst part is, everyone in that room nodded, like they already knew." I waited for her to offer the standard platitudes. "They don't know what they're talking about, art is subjective, you're great." But she didn't. She just breathed. A steady, rhythmic sound in the dark that somehow slowed my own racing heart. "I watch people for a living," she said finally. Her voice had dropped an octave, becoming something intimate, a secret shared in the dark. "I stand in the corners of these rooms every night. I watch how they move. I watch what they look at." "And?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "And tonight I watched them," she continued. "They weren't looking at the art, Olivia. They were looking at each other. They were looking for who was watching them. They were performing." She paused, and I felt the air shift, a subtle displacement as she leaned closer. "They wouldn't know a soul if it stared them in the face, because they're too busy checking their own reflections in the glass." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, not because they were kind, but because they felt true. She wasn't trying to make me feel better. She was telling me what she saw. "You think they're wrong?" I asked, needing to hear it. "I think they're loud," she corrected. "And I think you're listening to the noise instead of the silence." There was a click, loud and sharp in the small space. The doorknob turned. I tensed, ready to be exposed again, ready for the light and the noise and the shame. But she didn't open the door wide. She cracked it, just enough to let a sliver of dim, ambient light from the hallway slice across the floor. She wasn't opening it to kick me out. She was opening it for herself. "Come with me," she said, pushing the door open fully now. The hallway beyond was empty, the gala noise distant and muffled by the heavy gallery doors. "The museum is closed to them now, but it's open to us." She stepped out, her silhouette framed against the soft gray light of the corridor. She looked back at me, her hand extended not to pull me, but to invite. "Unless you really do prefer the mop bucket." I stepped out of the closet, and the world expanded. The transition was physical, a sudden rush of cool, conditioned air that shocked my skin after the stifling heat of the small room. The hallway stretched out before us, bathed in the spectral blue glow of the security lights and the pale, milky wash of moonlight filtering through the high skylights. It was the same hallway I had walked down hours ago, surrounded by donors and critics, but it felt like a different planet now. The noise was gone. The clinking glass, the forced laughter, the hum of judgment. It had all been scrubbed away, leaving only a profound, vibrating silence. "Stay close," she said. Her voice didn't echo. It seemed to be absorbed by the walls, kept private between us. "The motion sensors are set to a specific pattern. Walk where I walk." I nodded, falling into step beside her. I didn't even know her name, yet I trusted her navigation of this dark labyrinth more than I trusted my own agents in the light. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, her heavy boots making almost no sound on the polished concrete floors. My own heels clicked sharply, a staccato announcement of my presence that made me wince, but she didn't seem to mind. She just adjusted her pace, slowing her long strides to match mine, a silent concession that felt strangely protective. "I'm Isabella," she said, not looking back, her gaze scanning the shadows ahead with that same practiced precision. "Isabella," I repeated. The name felt solid, grounded, like the woman herself. "I know who you are, Olivia," she interrupted softly. There was a faint smile in her voice, audible even if I couldn't see her face clearly in the shadows. "I told you. I watch." We turned a corner into the main gallery, the vast, cavernous room where the permanent collection lived. In the daylight, this room was sterile, white-walled and imposing. At midnight, it was a cathedral of shadows. The statues were no longer marble figures on pedestals. They were silent observers, their frozen limbs casting long, distorted shapes across the floor. The paintings were dark windows into other worlds, their colors muted into grays and blacks. The air here was thick, charged with the energy of 1,000 trapped intentions. It felt heavy, but not crushing like the pressure of the gala. This was a different kind of weight, the weight of history, of endurance. And walking through it with Isabella felt illicit, like breaking into a church to find God sleeping. "It's different at night," I whispered. The acoustics of the room caught the sound, amplifying the intimacy of it. "It's honest at night," Isabella corrected. She stopped for a moment, waiting for me to catch up, though I was only half a step behind. When I reached her side, she didn't move away. We stood shoulder to shoulder in the center of the room, the only two living things in a graveyard of masterpieces. During the day, these things are commodities, investments, tax write-offs for the people drinking your champagne. But now they're just what they are. I looked at her profile, illuminated by the faint glow of an exit sign. She wasn't looking at the art with the critical, dissecting squint of a curator. She was looking at it with respect, with a quiet acknowledgement of its existence. We started walking again, the distance between us shrinking with every step. It wasn't intentional, or maybe it was. The vastness of the room should have made us drift apart, but instead, it pushed us together, gravity shifting to center on her. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a tangible warmth against the cool air of the gallery. Her uniform, stiff, utilitarian, designed to create a barrier of authority, brushed against the bare skin of my arm. The friction was slight, barely a graze, but it sent a shockwave through me that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with the sudden, sharp awareness of her proximity. I should have pulled away. I should have maintained the professional distance that separated the artist from the staff. But I didn't. I leaned into it, just a fraction of an inch, craving that solid, unflinching presence. The critics had spent the evening dissecting my soul, tearing it into manageable, critique-worthy pieces. Isabella, with her heavy belt and her quiet walk, Felt like she was the only thing holding me together. "You're not looking at your own work," she noted, guiding us past the entrance to the temporary exhibition hall where my failed show hung in suspended animation. "I can't," I admitted, looking straight ahead. "I can't see it right now. All I see are the words they used." "Then let's look at something else." She steered us toward the far end of the gallery, away from the spotlight pieces, away from the famous acquisitions. We moved in tandem, a synchronized drift through the dark. The silence stretched between us, not empty, but full of unspoken questions and the growing, heavy tension of two bodies moving in the dark. She stopped finally in front of a piece I had walked past 100 times and never truly seen. It was a sculpture, tucked away in a corner, usually overshadowed by a larger, louder canvas. Isabella turned to it, then to me, her dark eyes catching the limited light. "Tell me what you see," she commanded, softly. "Not what you're supposed to see. What is it?" "It's a distinctive piece," I began, my voice slipping automatically into the rehearsed cadence of a gallery tour. I had memorized the catalog copy for every major work in the building. It was part of the armor I wore to convince myself I belonged here. Cast bronze, late 20th century, the artist was deconstructing the concept of industrial permanence, using the negative space to imply, "No," Isabella said. The single word cut through my lecture like a blade through silk. It wasn't rude, but it was absolute. She stepped closer to the sculpture, a jagged, twisting mass of dark metal that spiraled upward in agonizing, sharp angles. She didn't look at the placard. She didn't step back to squint at it through the lens of art history. She stepped right up to the plinth, close enough that her breath might have fogged the metal if it were cold enough. "Forget the catalog," she said, her voice low, vibrating against the stillness of the room. "Look at the tension in the metal. Here." She pointed to a section near the base, where the bronze seemed to knot upon itself. Everyone walks past this and talks about industry or structure, but look at the way it pulls away from the center. It's not structural. It's terrified. I blinked, the academic jargon dying on my tongue. I looked where she was pointing. For years I had seen this piece as a study in balance, but now, following the line of her finger, I saw what she saw. The metal wasn't balancing, it was recoiling. It looked like muscle tensed in anticipation of a blow that never came. It looked exhausted. "It's a flinch," she murmured, turning her head slightly to look at me. The shadows cut across her face, highlighting the sharp geometry of her cheekbones, the dark intensity of her eyes. The whole thing is just one long, held breath. It's waiting for permission to collapse. The precision of it took the air out of my lungs. She hadn't used a single word from the lexicon of high art. She hadn't mentioned composition, or texture, or movement. She had simply looked at the thing and seen the raw, ugly emotion welded into its core. It was a level of honesty I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. The critics at the gala had used 10,000 words to say nothing. Isabella had used 3 sentences to strip the piece naked. "I never saw it that way," I admitted, the confession feeling dangerous in the quiet. "I always thought it was about strength." "Endurance isn't the same as strength," she said. "Sometimes it's just fear that hasn't found a place to land yet." She turned fully toward me then, and the sculpture was forgotten. The gallery felt suddenly smaller, the vast ceilings pressing down, concentrating the atmosphere around us. The air thickened, charged with a sudden, heavy awareness. She was looking at me with that same terrifying clarity she had turned on the bronze. She was looking for the flinch. "You talk about your work the way you talked about this statue," she observed. "Like you're reading from a script. Like you're trying to convince us it's strong so we don't notice it's afraid." My hands tightened into fists at my sides. "I have to," I whispered. "Do you know what happens if I show them I'm scared? They eat you alive, Isabella. If you don't give them a narrative, they invent one for you, and theirs is always cruel." "So you painted a lie?" The question was soft, but it landed with the weight of a stone. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to talk about market pressures, about the expectations of the board, about the crushing weight of the debut. But standing there in the dark, with the smell of rain and starch clinging to her, the excuses felt ash gray and useless. "I painted what I thought they wanted," I said, my voice cracking. "I painted for the applause. I wanted to be the artist they expected, the genius, the prodigy. I polished every rough edge until there was nothing left to catch the light. And they hated it anyway, she said. They hated it, I confirmed, tears pricking my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of saying it out loud. They called it technical perfection without a pulse. Isabella stepped closer. The distance between us evaporated. She was right there, a solid, warm presence in the cool dark. She didn't touch me, but the proximity was a touch in itself. I could feel the heat radiating from her uniform. "Show me," she said. I looked up at her, startled. "What?" "The piece they hated the most," she said. Her gaze was unflinching, holding mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. The one that made the critic write that headline. "Take me to it." "Why would you want to see that?" I asked, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "It's a disaster. It's the reason I was hiding in your closet." "Because," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a register that shivered down my spine, "if the people who drink champagne and stare at their own reflections hated it, then it's probably the only honest thing in this entire building." The walk to the temporary exhibition hall felt less like a gallery tour and more like a march to the gallows. My heels, which had clicked with such sharp, professional authority earlier in the evening, now sounded hollow against the floorboards. A rhythmic countdown to an execution I thought I had already survived. Isabella moved beside me, her presence a steady, dark gravity that made escape impossible. She didn't push, she didn't drag, but the sheer weight of her expectation pulled me forward. Every step away from the safety of the shadows and toward the scene of the crime made my breath hitch in my throat. "We don't have to do this," I tried, the words slipping out in a whisper that sounded too fragile for the high ceilings. I stopped, my hand hovering over the velvet rope that cordoned off the entrance to the East Wing. "You've seen the reviews. You know the verdict. Why do you need to see the body?" Isabella stopped, but she didn't look at me. She looked into the darkness of the hall ahead, where the shapes of my canvases hung like suspended ghosts in the gloom. "Because I don't trust the jury," she said simply. She unhooked the velvet rope with a metallic click that echoed like a gunshot. "And because you're stalling." "I'm not stalling," I lied, crossing my arms over my chest, trying to physically hold myself together. "I'm exercising my right to remain silent." "You're trembling again," she noted, finally turning that flashlight beam toward me, not in my eyes, but lower, catching the way my hands were gripping my own elbows until the knuckles turned white. "Walk, Olivia." I walked. I didn't have a choice. It wasn't that she was forcing me. It was that she was the only real thing in a world that had dissolved into smoke and mirrors. And I was terrified that if I let her go, I would disappear completely. We moved into the main room. The smell of fresh paint and expensive wine lingered here, a stale perfume of the night's earlier disaster. The track lights were off, leaving the paintings in a gray, flat purgatory, stripped of the dramatic lighting that was supposed to make them sing. "Which one?" Isabella asked. Her voice was low, barely disturbing the silence. I hesitated, my eyes darting to the far wall. It was the largest canvas in the show, the centerpiece, the one I had spent 6 months bleeding over, only to have the critic from the review dismiss it as a chaotic scream in a library, loud, unnecessary, and embarrassing. "That one," I pointed, my finger shaking. "The big one. Entropy." Isabella didn't wait for me. She walked straight to it, her boots heavy and deliberate. I followed, hanging back, staying just outside the range of her flashlight. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see the failure illuminated. She stopped 3 feet from the canvas and raised the light. The beam cut through the darkness, hitting the center of the painting. It was a violent piece, or at least it was supposed to be. Layers of charcoal and oil slashed and burned into the canvas, a storm of grays and blacks with a single bleeding vein of crimson running through the center. I had meant it to be about the collapse of structure, about the moment things fall apart. The critics had called it a tantrum. Isabella stood perfectly still. The beam of light moved slowly, agonizingly, tracing the texture of the paint. She followed the jagged lines of the charcoal, the thick impasto ridges of the oil. She wasn't scanning it like a viewer. She was inspecting it, like a forensic analyst looking for the point of impact. The silence stretched. It grew teeth. Every second she didn't speak felt like a confirmation of the reviews. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a flush of shame that burned even in the cool air. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab the flashlight and smash it. I wanted her to say something, anything, just to break the suffocating weight of her observation. "It's messy," I blurted out, unable to stand it anymore. "I know. It lacks discipline. The composition falls apart in the third quadrant. You don't have to be polite about it." Isabella didn't lower the light. She didn't turn around. She just took a step closer, until she was almost touching the surface of the canvas. "Is that what they told you?" she asked, her voice devoid of judgment, stripped down to pure curiosity. "It's what they wrote," I said bitterly. "They said I lost control." "Good," she murmured. The word hung in the air, confusing and sharp. "What?" "Control is for the people watching," she said, moving the light to the crimson vein. The part of the painting I had almost painted over because it felt too raw, too exposing. This isn't a performance. This is a wound." She finally lowered the flashlight, plunging the painting back into the merciful gray of the shadows. But she didn't step back. She turned, slowly, pivoting on her heel until she was facing me. The darkness was absolute now, save for the ambient glow from the hallway, but I could feel her gaze. It was heavier than the light had been. It pressed against my skin, reading the panic in my eyes, the rapid rise and fall of my chest, the way I was holding my breath like a child hiding from a monster. "They hated it because it's the only time you stopped lying to them," Isabella said. Her voice was a low rumble, closing the distance between us without moving a muscle. "You stopped trying to be precise, and you started screaming. People in tuxedos don't like it when you scream, Olivia. It reminds them that they're quiet." My breath left me in a rush. I felt stripped, flayed open. She wasn't looking at the art anymore. She was looking at the wreckage of the woman who made it. And for the first time all night, amidst the ruin of my career, I didn't feel evaluated. I felt seen. "I didn't scream," I whispered, the denial automatic, a reflex honed by years of cocktail parties and gallery openings where composure was the only currency that mattered. I was just experimenting with texture. "You were screaming," Isabella corrected, her voice dropping another octave, vibrating through the floorboards, through the soles of my shoes, straight into the marrow of my bones. "And you're doing it again right now. You're just doing it quietly." She turned fully away from the painting then, dismissing the canvas as if it were merely evidence she had already processed and filed away. Her attention fixed solely on me. The flashlight beam was pointed at the floor now, a pool of white light that cast our faces in severe, dramatic relief. But she didn't need the light to see me. I could feel her gaze tracking the pulse jumping in my throat, the way my chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic hitches. "Why does it matter what they think?" she asked. It wasn't a philosophical question. It was a challenge. She took a step forward, her heavy boots making a solid, deliberate sound on the polished wood. "They came for the free wine and the social standing. They didn't come for you." "Because they decide if I get to stay," I snapped, the frustration finally boiling over, cracking the veneer of my fear. "They decide if I'm an artist or just a girl who made a mess. They hold the keys, Isabella." "No," she said, taking another step. The distance between us was now less than arm's length. "I hold the keys." The literal truth of her words slammed into the metaphorical weight of them. She did hold the keys. She had the heavy ring of them on her belt, the metal clinking softly with her movement. She controlled the doors, the lights, the perimeter. In this building, at this hour, the board of directors was a ghost story. She was the reality. "You're hiding from the wrong people," she murmured. She was close enough now that I had to tilt my head back to look her in the eye. The air between us didn't just thicken, it solidified. It became a physical presence, a wall of static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You're terrified of the people who look at the surface, but you're standing here with someone who's looking at the structure. And you're not running." "I can't run," I breathed. It was the truth. My feet felt rooted to the floor, held in place by the sheer gravitational pull of her presence. Good. She stepped into my personal space, crossing the invisible boundary that strangers, especially staff and guests, were never supposed to cross. It was a violation of every social protocol I knew, and I wanted it more than I had ever wanted the polite applause. The heat radiating from her was startling in the climate-controlled chill of the gallery. It was a living warmth, smelling of night air and the sharp, clean scent of her uniform. I looked up into her eyes. In the dim light, her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris. 2 dark wells of absolute focus. There was no judgment there. There was no critique of my composition or my color theory. There was only a raw, predatory curiosity. She was looking at me like I was the art, not the polished, presentable version I put on the brochure, but the messy, screaming thing I had tried to hide in the paint. "You prefer this," she said softly. It was a statement, not a question. "You prefer the judgment of the dark." "I prefer the truth," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "Then here it is," she whispered. She leaned in, her face inches from mine. I could feel the ghost of her breath against my cheek, warm and steady. "You're not a failure, Olivia. You're just dangerous. And that scares them. It scares you too." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the critics and everything to do with the woman standing so close I could count the eyelashes framing her dark eyes. The shame of the evening, the reviews, the whispers, the pity, evaporated. It was burned away by the intensity of her attention. I realized with a jolt of vertigo that I didn't care anymore if the Times called me vacant. I only cared that Isabella thought I was dangerous. The realization made my knees weak. I swayed, just slightly, and the movement seemed to snap the last thread of professional distance. Isabella's hand lifted from her side. It moved slowly, deliberately, giving me every opportunity to back away, to flinch, to retreat into the safety of my social standing. I didn't move. I watched her hand rise, the long fingers, the capable palm, hovering in the space between us. She wasn't reaching for the painting. She wasn't reaching for the flashlight. She was reaching for me. Her hand stopped inches from my waist, hovering there, a silent question suspended in the charged air. She wasn't taking. She was asking. And the answer was pounding in my blood, louder than any scream I had ever painted. I didn't retreat. I didn't step back into the safety of the misunderstood genius role I'd been playing all night. I stayed right where I was, breathing in the scent of rain and authority, and I nodded. It was a microscopic movement, barely a dip of the chin, but in the charged silence of the gallery, it was a shout. Isabella's hand closed the distance. When her palm made contact with my waist, the breath left my lungs in a sharp, ragged exhale. It wasn't a tentative touch. It wasn't the polite, hovering guidance of a museum patron, or the clammy, nervous handshake of a fan. It was firm. It was possessive. Her fingers splayed over the silk of my dress, the heat of her skin searing through the thin fabric, branding me right there in the dark. It was a grounding force, an anchor dropped suddenly into the churning ocean of my anxiety. "You're shaking," she whispered again. But this time, the words were brushed against the shell of my ear. She had leaned in, collapsing the final inch of space between us. "I'm not cold," I managed to choke out, my voice trembling, betraying every secret I had left. "I know." Her thumb brushed a slow, deliberate arc against my ribcage, a friction that sent sparks racing down my spine. The sensation was electric, shattering the numbness that had held me since the first review dropped. The acoustics of the high-ceilinged room, designed to carry the whispers of awe from tourists, now conspired to amplify us. The sound of her uniform shifting, the leather of her belt creaking softly, the catch in my own throat. It all sounded impossibly loud. "This is against protocol," I whispered, the protest weak and entirely unconvincing even to my own ears. I was clutching at rules I didn't even care about, just to have something to say other than please. "The museum is closed," Isabella murmured. Her other hand came up, not to touch me, but to rest on the wall behind my head, effectively boxing me in. I was trapped between the painting that revealed my soul and the woman who had seen it. There is no protocol for this. She was right. There was no handbook for the way the air felt suddenly too thin to share. There were no rules for the way her gaze dropped to my mouth, heavy and expectant, before flickering back up to my eyes. The professional distance, the chasm between the artist on the pedestal and the guard in the shadows, had vanished. We were just 2 women standing in the wreckage of a gala, drawn together by a gravity that felt inevitable. I let my head fall back against the wall, exposing the line of my throat. It was a surrender. It was the moment the Olivia Vance who gave interviews and smiled for cameras ceased to exist. In her place was just Olivia, the woman who had hidden in a closet because she was terrified of being seen, only to find that being seen was the only thing she actually wanted. Isabella. I breathed her name, testing the weight of it on my tongue. It tasted like iron and smoke. Tell me to stop, she challenged, her voice rougher now, stripped of its earlier calm. Her hip pressed against mine, a solid, warm weight that made my knees buckle. Tell me you want me to walk away and lock the door and leave you here with your critics. Don't you dare, I whispered. The corner of her mouth quirked up, a ghost of a smile that was sharp and dangerous. I didn't think so. She shifted her grip on my waist, pulling me flush against her. The contact was a shock to the system. The roughness of her utility vest against the delicate silk of my bodice, the cold metal of her badge pressing into my chest, the undeniable heat of her body. It was a study in contrasts, a collision of two worlds that had no business touching, yet fit together with terrifying precision. My hands, which had been clenched at my sides, finally found the courage to move. They reached out, tentatively at first, then with desperate certainty, clutching the lapels of her uniform jacket. The fabric was stiff, durable, real. I held on like she was the only solid thing in a world of abstract concepts. You see me, I said, the realization tumbling out. You actually see me. Isabella lowered her head, her forehead resting against mine. We were breathing the same air now, a shared rhythm in the dark. I told you, she murmured, her lips brushing against my cheek as she spoke, a teasing, maddening proximity. I watch, and I haven't been able to look at anything else all night. The confession hung between us, raw and honest. The tension coiled tight, waiting to snap. The silence stretched tight, a wire pulled to its breaking point. I could feel the warmth of her breath mingling with mine, steady and rhythmic against the chaotic staccato of my own pulse. The gallery, the critics, the crushing weight of the gala outside, it all receded, pushed to the margins by the gravity of the woman standing in front of me. Isabella didn't rush. That was the most dangerous thing about her. She moved with the inevitability of a rising tide. Her hand slid from my waist up to the nape of my neck, her fingers tangling in the loose strands of hair that had escaped my pins. The friction of her calloused thumb against the sensitive skin there was a shock, a rough, grounding reality that I leaned into instinctively. You talk too much, she whispered, her mouth hovering millimeters from mine. She didn't let me finish. She closed the gap. The kiss wasn't tentative. It wasn't the polite, airbrushed affection I was used to in my world of social performance. It was absolute. It was a claim. Her lips were soft against the hard line of her jaw, but the pressure behind them was firm, demanding a response I was more than ready to give. I made a sound, a small, desperate noise trapped in the back of my throat, and melted against her. The cold wall behind me ceased to exist. The only reality was the heat of her body pressing into mine. The rough texture of her uniform jacket scratched against the bare skin of my arms, a sensation that felt incredibly good, like it was scrubbing away the polish and the pretense I had coated myself in for years. It was slow. It was a conversation without words, a debate about control that I was happily losing. She tasted of bitter coffee in the cool night air, a dark, rich flavor that flooded my senses. My hands, which had been gripping her lapels, slid up, wrapping around her neck, pulling her closer, needing to eliminate even the concept of space between us. The critics' voices, the ones that had been screaming in my head all night, went silent. They were drowned out by the rush of blood in my ears, by the overwhelming, singular sensation of being wanted. Not wanted for my potential, or my name, or my market value. Wanted for the heat in my skin and the breath in my lungs. Isabella groaned low in her throat, a vibration that passed directly into my chest. She deepened the kiss, tilting her head, her grip on my neck tightening just enough to anchor me. It was sultry, a slow burn that felt like it could consume the entire museum. There was no frantic grasping, no desperate fumbling. There was just this, precision. She kissed me with the same unflinching focus she had turned on the sculpture. She was exploring the tension, finding the breaking point, and turning it into something beautiful. I felt raw. exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the backless dress and everything to do with the way she was dismantling my defenses one by one. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her chest, and I knew she could feel it through the layers of her uniform. I hoped she could. I wanted her to know exactly what she was doing to me. She shifted, her legs sliding between mine, pressing me harder against the wall. The friction sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core, making my knees buckle. If she hadn't been holding me up, I would have slid to the floor. I was lightheaded, dizzy with the scent of her, with the taste of her, with the sheer, impossible reality of her. For a moment, I forgot where we were. I forgot the million-dollar paintings surrounding us. I forgot the security cameras that might be recording this illicit meeting of worlds. I was just a body, responding to a body, a flinch finding a place to land. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't far, just an inch, just enough to breathe. Her forehead rested against mine again, her eyes closed, her chest heaving with the same ragged breath that tore through mine. Her thumb swept across my cheekbone, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "There," she whispered, her voice rough, wrecked. "That's the truth." I opened my eyes, blinking in the dim light. The gallery looked different. The shadows weren't ominous anymore. They were a blanket. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. The painting behind her loomed in the dark, but it didn't look like a mistake anymore. It looked like the prelude to this. "You're dangerous," I managed to say, my voice barely a ghost of a sound. My lips felt swollen, bruised in the best possible way. Isabella opened her eyes. They were dark, dilated, swallowing the light. She looked at me with a hunger that was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I told you," she said, her thumb tracing the line of my lower lip. I just pay attention. The night didn't end with a sudden snap. It dissolved, slowly and inevitably, into the gray, quiet wash of dawn. I didn't realize how much time had passed until the skylights overhead began to shift from squares of absolute black to a pale, milky slate. The artificial darkness of the gallery was breached by the first reluctant fingers of morning, filtering down through the glass and changing the texture of the air around us. We had moved to a bench in the center of the room, the physical distance between us bridged by the silence we now shared. The frantic energy of the closet and the charged heat of the kiss had settled into something deeper, a steady, humming resonance that felt like the aftermath of a storm. My head rested on Isabella's shoulder, the rough wool of her uniform jacket scratching gently against my cheek, a sensation that had become a grounding anchor. Her arm was draped along the back of the bench, her hand resting near my shoulder, not holding me down, but keeping me close. I lifted my head slowly, blinking against the gathering light. The gallery looked different in the dawn. The shadows that had hidden us were retreating, revealing the scuff marks on the floor, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of gray light, and the stark reality of my painting hanging on the far wall. I looked at Entropy. Really looked at it. Under the unforgiving light of morning, devoid of the dramatic gallery spots, it looked raw. The crimson vein I had worried over didn't look like a mistake anymore. It looked like an artery. The chaotic charcoal slashes weren't a lack of discipline. They were a transcript of the noise in my head. For the first time, I saw the painting not through the eyes of the critics who wanted polish, but through Isabella's eyes. She had called it a wound. She was right. And wounds weren't supposed to be pretty. They were supposed to bleed. "It's not broken," I whispered, the realization settling in my chest with the weight of a stone finally finding the riverbed. "It's just unfinished." Isabella turned her head, the morning light catching the sharp angle of her jaw and the dark, steady pull of her eyes. She didn't offer false praise. She didn't try to fix it. She simply nodded. "Nothing living is ever finished, Olivia. Only dead things are perfect." The truth of it washed over me, stripping away the last clinging remnants of the shame that had driven me into the supply closet. The critics were looking for a corpse, something preserved, static, and easy to categorize. I had given them something alive, something that thrashed and screamed, and they had recoiled. That wasn't my failure. It was their fear. "I have to go," I said, though my body made no move to stand. "The cleaning crews will be here soon. The day shift." "I know," Isabella said. She stood up first, her movement fluid and heavy, pulling the warmth away from my side. The loss of contact was a physical ache, sharp and immediate. She offered me a hand. I took it, letting her pull me to my feet. Her grip was firm, her palm rough and warm against mine. We didn't let go immediately. We stood there in the gray light, the wreckage of my career hanging on the wall behind us, and the woman who had found me in the dark standing in front of me. "The service exit," she said, guiding me not toward the grand front doors where the red carpet lay abandoned, but toward the back of the museum. We walked in silence through the labyrinth of corridors, past the freight elevators and the loading docks. This was the anatomy of the building, the bones beneath the skin. It felt fitting. We stopped at a heavy steel door. Isabella swiped her badge, the lock disengaging with a heavy mechanical thud. She pushed the door open, and the cool, damp air of the city morning rushed in to meet us. The street outside was empty, the city just beginning to stir. She turned to me, one hand resting on the doorframe, blocking the exit for just a second longer. She didn't ask for my number. She didn't ask when I would come back. She just looked at me with that same terrifying, wonderful precision. "Don't polish the next one," she said. It was an order, quiet and absolute. "I won't," I promised. She stepped back, releasing me into the morning. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, sealing the museum and the night inside. I stood alone on the sidewalk, the early morning chill biting through my silk dress, but I didn't shiver. I walked toward the main avenue, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. My phone buzzed in my purse, a notification of a new review, a text from my agent, a headline I didn't need to read. I didn't reach for it. I just kept walking, a secret smile touching my lips, carrying the weight of a new truth. I wasn't hiding anymore. If you've ever found clarity in the most unexpected place, subscribe for more stories.